They thought they could bulldoze my cabin like it was some old shack, but what they didn't know was that they had just picked a fight with the wrong man. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this whole story didn't start with bulldozers or flashing lights. It started with me just wanting a peaceful place to call my own. My name's Daniel, and after years of working long hours in the city, I finally decided to buy a lake cabin. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't flashy, but it was quiet, peaceful, and exactly what I needed. The cabin sat right on the edge of the lake, surrounded by pine trees, with a small dock stretching into the water. It was perfect. Or at least it should have been, until the HOA showed up. You see, my property was technically outside their boundaries. I bought the cabin fair and square, with a clean deed, no liens, and no mention of HOA jurisdiction. I had checked it myself and even had a lawyer double-check it before I signed the paperwork. I thought I was in the clear. But that was before I met her, the HOA president, who everyone in the neighborhood referred to as Karen. She was one of those people who believed everything around the lake belonged to her, whether the law agreed or not. From the first time she saw me unloading boxes from my truck, she marched straight across the gravel path, clipboard in hand, barking orders like she was running the entire county. "Excuse me," she snapped, "you can't just move in here without registering with the HOA. I'll need you to sign these forms, and you'll be responsible for paying monthly dues." "That dock? That'll be a separate fee. And you'll need approval for any exterior changes." I remember staring at her in disbelief. "Ma'am, I'm not in your HOA. This property is independent. I don't owe you a dime." Her eyes narrowed like I had just slapped her with an insult. "Everyone around this lake follows my rules," she hissed. "If you think you're going to live here without paying your share, you're in for a surprise." I brushed her off, thinking it was just idle talk. People like her thrive on control, and when someone doesn't bend, they lash out. I figured she'd get bored and leave me alone. Boy, was I wrong. That was just the beginning of her campaign against me. Within days, I started finding letters in my mailbox. They looked official, with HOA letterheads and stamps, claiming I owed $450 in monthly dues, plus late fees for months I hadn't even lived there. One letter said they could lien the property if I didn't pay up. Another threatened legal action. I laughed, tossed them in the trash, and carried on with my life. But the threats kept escalating. Neighbors started whispering. Some of them warned me quietly, saying Karen had a history of bullying people into paying even when she had no authority. She'd slap fake fines on them for things like leaving a kayak on their dock, parking in the wrong spot, or not trimming bushes exactly to her liking. People paid just to avoid the hassle, and that only made her bolder. One morning, I woke up to find bright orange posters stapled to my cabin door. They said, "Notice of delinquency, property subject to HOA action." I tore them down and stormed over to Karen's house, demanding answers. She stood there smug, sipping coffee on her porch like she was queen of the lake. "You're trespassing," she said calmly. "You're behind on your dues. Pay up, or we'll take further action." I held up the deed right in her face. "This says my property is exempt. You don't own me, and you don't own my cabin." Her smile didn't even falter. "That piece of paper won't save you. Everyone pays in the end." That sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, with this eerie certainty. I realized then that Karen wasn't just bluffing. She was planning something bigger, and she fully believed she could get away with it. From then on, little accidents started happening. My trash bins were mysteriously knocked over every week, even though no one else's were touched. Someone sprayed weed killer along the edge of my lawn, leaving big brown patches. I'd come home to find my gate wide open, even though I knew I had locked it. One evening, I caught two HOA enforcers, guys Karen always had hanging around, standing at the edge of my driveway, taking pictures of my cabin. When I confronted them, they muttered something about inspection and walked off. I decided to document everything. Every letter, every notice, every weird encounter, I recorded it all. Still, nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. One weekend, I had gone back to the city for work. It was only 3 days, but when I drove back up to the lake, something felt wrong. Even before I turned the corner, I saw dust clouds rising. My stomach dropped. As I got closer, I could hear the rumble of heavy machinery. I floored the gas, heart pounding, and when I finally pulled into my driveway, my jaw nearly hit the steering wheel. There it was. My cabin, my peaceful escape, being torn down piece by piece. A bulldozer sat in the yard, its massive claw smashing through the roof. A wrecking crew in hard hats was hauling out beams and tossing my belongings into a growing pile of debris. My dock was ripped apart, my porch reduced to splinters. And right in the middle of it all, standing tall with her arms crossed like some sort of dictator, was Karen. She was directing the whole operation like she was proud of herself. When she saw me, she didn't flinch, she smirked. "Should have paid your dues, Daniel," she called out over the noise. This is what happens when you ignore the HOA. My blood ran hot. I slammed the truck door and stormed toward her, shouting, "You have no right. You're trespassing, you're destroying my home." She didn't even blink. "This property belongs to the HOA now. Consider it seized." In that moment, something inside me snapped. She wasn't bluffing anymore. She had actually followed through on her threats. My entire home was being demolished right in front of me. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that she hadn't just picked on some random cabin owner. She had just picked a fight with the wrong family. Because my family? We weren't just ordinary people. We were federal agents. And she was about to find out exactly what that meant. The sound of splintering wood and crunching metal filled the air as I stood frozen, watching years of hard work and savings crumble before my eyes. My hands shook with rage as the bulldozer ripped another wall apart, sending dust and debris flying through the sunlight. The wrecking crew worked with mechanical precision, almost as if they'd done this 100 times before. And in the middle of it all stood Karen, arms crossed, chin high, like she had just conquered an empire. She looked directly at me, that smug grin plastered across her face, and said words I'll never forget, "You didn't pay your dues. This is what happens to rule breakers." My voice cracked with fury as I shouted back, "This isn't your property. You have no authority here. You're breaking the law." But she just shrugged, waved at the workers, and barked, "Ignore him, keep going. Finish the job." The crew hesitated for a second when they saw how furious I was, but Karen's sharp glare whipped them back into action. She had them under her thumb, and they weren't going to cross her for me. I yanked out my phone and started recording everything, the bulldozer, the workers, the smug HOA president standing there like she owned the world. The moment Karen noticed the camera, her face twisted with anger. She stormed toward me, her heels crunching on the gravel, and snapped, "Put that phone away. You can't record here. You're harassing my workers." I held the phone higher, panning it across the scene. "This is my property," I shot back. "You're the one trespassing, and this is going straight to the police." She lunged as if to snatch the phone out of my hand, but I stepped back quickly, and the camera caught every second of her attempt to grab it. Her face, twisted with fury, was proof enough of her guilt. My heart was pounding. Part of me wanted to rush in and physically stop the bulldozer, but I knew that would only end badly. Instead, I called the sheriff's office right then and there. My voice was sharp, almost shaking with rage, as I told the dispatcher, "There are people trespassing on my property. They've hired a crew and are demolishing my cabin as we speak. I need deputies here now." The dispatcher promised units were on their way, but in my gut, I knew the situation wouldn't be so simple. "See, Karen was no amateur at this game. By the time the sheriff's deputies rolled up in their cruisers, Karen had already staged her scene. She was holding a thick folder of papers, flipping through them with exaggerated calmness, like a lawyer about to present her case in court. The deputies got out, saw the half-demolished cabin, and immediately walked over, their eyes darting between me and the crew. I ran up to them, shoving my deed in their hands. "This is my property. I bought it legally. I'm not part of this HOA. They have no authority to touch it. They're trespassing and destroying my home." But before the deputy could even process my words, Karen slid into the conversation like a snake. "Don't listen to him," she said smoothly. "He's been delinquent on HOA dues for months. We followed proper procedure, filed liens, and now the HOA has taken rightful possession. He's just upset because he thinks the rules don't apply to him." The deputies looked at her, then at me, then at the paperwork she handed over. They weren't lawyers, they didn't know HOA jurisdiction inside and out. And Karen, with her confident tone and neatly printed documents, made it sound like she was in the right. One of the deputies even asked me, "Sir, do you have proof you're not part of this HOA? Because she's showing us paperwork that says otherwise." I felt my stomach twist. Proof? I had it, but it was buried under the rubble of my cabin. My deed was in my glove box, but in that moment, it felt like I was up against an entire machine designed to crush me. And Karen knew it. She smirked, folded her arms, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Told you, everyone pays in the end." That's when something inside me shifted. The fear, the shock, the helplessness, they all burned away, replaced by cold determination. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my federal badge, and held it up to the deputies. The golden eagle shimmered in the sunlight as I said firmly, "Officer, this is not just a civil matter anymore. This is criminal destruction of property under fraudulent pretenses. You are witnessing a felony in progress." The deputies froze. Karen's smirk faltered for the first time. I stepped closer, my voice sharp and commanding now. "This property is outside HOA jurisdiction. These documents are fabricated. And unless you want to be complicit in this, you will stop this demolition crew immediately." Karen's face drained of color. She stammered, that badge doesn't scare me. You can't just," but her words stumbled. She hadn't expected me to have that kind of authority. The deputies turned to her, suddenly suspicious, and asked to see her official paperwork. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the surge of adrenaline coursing through me. I knew my deed was solid. I knew she had overstepped. But the sight of my cabins remained smoldering in the dust fueled a rage I could barely contain. As the deputies examined her documents, I made a quick call, not to the local sheriff, but to someone else. "Yeah, it's me," I said into the phone. "We've got a situation at the lake cabin. HOA fraud, property destruction, trespassing. I need backup." The voice on the other end was calm, steady, and all too familiar. It was my brother, an ATF agent. He simply replied, "On our way." Karen, still clutching her papers, didn't realize the storm she had just unleashed. She thought she was bullying another homeowner into submission. What she didn't know was that my entire family, my father, my siblings, myself, we were all federal agents in different branches. We weren't just trained to deal with situations like this, we were trained to dismantle fraud, corruption, and abuse of power at its core. As I stood there with the deputies, the demolition halted temporarily while the paperwork was checked. Karen kept pacing, barking at the workers to stay ready. She still thought she could talk her way out of this. She didn't know that every word, every action, every forged piece of paper was already being documented for a federal case. The longer I stared at the wreckage of my cabin, the more determined I became. She thought this was the end of my fight. But in reality, this was only the beginning. She had just declared war against the wrong man, and soon, she was going to regret every second of it. The moment I flashed my badge, the entire energy around the scene shifted. The deputies, who seconds ago looked ready to side with Karen, now exchanged glances with uncertainty. They weren't dealing with just another angry homeowner, they were dealing with a federal agent. Karen's confidence cracked for the first time. Her smile twitched, her grip on those forged documents tightened, and a faint redness spread across her cheeks. She tried to laugh it off, like I was bluffing, but her voice betrayed her. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "A badge doesn't change the fact that he hasn't paid his dues. This is HOA procedure." But even as she said it, her tone wavered. I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers. "This isn't HOA procedure. This is fraud, extortion, and destruction of private property. And I guarantee you, every bit of this will be investigated." The deputies were cautious now. One of them turned to Karen and asked, "Ma'am, do you have proof that this property is under your HOA's jurisdiction? Because he's showing us a badge, and this deed clearly states he owns it outright." Karen's face flushed. She shoved the papers into their hands. "It's all right there. Liens, delinquency notices, board approvals. Everything." But as they thumbed through the stack, it was obvious something didn't add up. The formatting was sloppy. Dates didn't align. Signatures looked like they were traced from other documents. And at the top of the so-called HOA lien, in big bold letters, was the name of an HOA that didn't even exist in county records. The deputies gave each other that look, the kind of look that said, "We've been played." That's when headlights cut across the dirt road. Two black SUVs rolled up, their tires crunching over the gravel. The engines cut, doors opened, and out stepped my reinforcements. My brother, dressed in his ATF jacket, sunglasses hiding his eyes but not his grim expression, was the first out. My sister followed right behind him, Homeland Security badge hanging around her neck, her stance sharp and ready. To Karen, it must have looked like the cavalry had just arrived. Her eyes darted between them and me, and she finally realized she hadn't just picked a fight with one federal agent, she had stumbled into a hornet's nest of an entire family trained in federal law enforcement. My brother walked straight to the demolition crew and ordered them to shut down their machinery immediately. His voice was calm but carried the weight of authority that made even the toughest men hesitate. "Turn it off. Step away from the bulldozer. This site is now under federal investigation." The foreman, who had been glaring at me minutes before, suddenly looked pale. He fumbled with the keys, killed the engine, and stepped back with his crew. My sister, meanwhile, approached the deputies and took the so-called HOA documents from Karen's hands. She flipped through them with a practiced eye, her lips tightening with every page. Finally, she held one up and said, "This isn't just fake. This is criminal. These seals are forged. These signatures are copied. This is fraud, plain and simple." Karen tried to backpedal. You don't understand," she stammered. "This is standard procedure. We've done this before. Everyone pays. Everyone." That last line slipped out like a confession, and I saw the deputy's eyebrows shoot up. Done this before? How many times had she pulled this scam on unsuspecting homeowners who didn't know their rights, who didn't have the resources to fight back? My stomach churned as I thought about all the people she might have bullied, all the homes she might have stolen. I turned to her, voice low but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "You've made a career out of threatening families, forging papers, and taking property that doesn't belong to you. But your career ends today." She shook her head violently. "You can't do this to me. I run this community. Everyone listens to me." My sister smirked, sliding the fake documents into an evidence folder. "Not anymore." The deputies, now fully aware of the mess they were standing in, stepped forward. One of them looked at Karen with a firm expression. "Ma'am, you're under investigation for fraud, trespassing, and destruction of property. You need to stay right here." Karen panicked. She spun around, as if looking for an escape route, but my brother had already positioned himself behind her, blocking her path. The crew looked uneasy, shifting from foot to foot. Some of them muttered apologies to me, saying they had no idea this job was illegal. They were just hired muscle, following orders. But I could see the guilt in their eyes. They'd watched my cabin crumble while Karen waved her fake paperwork around. The deputies began questioning Karen, but she wasn't done lashing out. She turned to me, her face twisted with rage. "You think this is over? You think you can just roll in here with your family and stop me? I'll sue you. I'll sue all of you. You'll be paying me for the rest of your life." Her words were venom, but they only made her look more desperate. I held up my phone, which was still recording, and said calmly, "Go ahead. Every threat you make goes into evidence. You're only digging your own grave deeper." At that exact moment, my father arrived. He wasn't in uniform, but his presence was commanding. A senior FBI agent with decades of experience, he walked up slowly, surveying the wreckage of my cabin and the circus happening around it. His jaw clenched as he took it all in. Finally, he turned to Karen and said, in that calm, low tone that only seasoned agents can pull off, "Ma'am, you've just committed one of the dumbest crimes I've seen in a long time. And you did it in front of half a dozen witnesses and 4 federal agents. Do you have any idea what's about to happen to you?" Karen's bravado cracked completely. She stuttered, You can't all be federal agents. That's impossible." My father pulled out his badge, holding it up without a word. Her knees buckled slightly as she realized she had stumbled into the worst possible nightmare. The deputies radioed for backup, and soon more squad cars arrived. Karen was officially placed under arrest, her wrists cuffed as she screamed about her rights and how the lake belonged to her. The demolition crew was detained for questioning, though most of them were eventually released once it became clear they had been misled. But Karen? She wasn't going anywhere. She sat in the back of the squad car, thrashing and yelling, her empire of lies collapsing around her. I stood there, staring at the remains of my cabin. Anger burned in my chest, but so did relief. Relief that she had finally been caught. Relief that she couldn't hurt anyone else. My sister placed a hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "We'll rebuild. And she'll never see daylight again without remembering what she did here." I nodded, but my eyes were still fixed on Karen as the cruiser drove away. She had spent years bullying people, but now she was facing the full weight of federal law. And she had no one to blame but herself. That night, as the sun set over the lake, the silence felt different. Not peaceful, not yet, but full of promise. I knew this wasn't the end of the story. This was only the turning point. Karen's arrest was the first domino. The investigation was about to uncover just how deep her corruption went, and I was determined to see it through to the very end. The night after Karen's arrest, I sat on the back of my pickup truck staring at the pile of rubble that used to be my cabin. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, but the peace I had once felt there was gone. My home, my safe place, had been reduced to dust because of one woman's obsession with power. But as the cool breeze brushed against my face, I realized something important. This wasn't just about me anymore. Karen's arrogance, her fake papers, her lies, they had likely hurt countless families around the lake. My cabin was just the most recent victim. She had made a business out of fear and intimidation, and now that she was in custody, it was my job to make sure every bit of her corruption was brought into the light. The following week, my family and I began working around the clock. We weren't just federal agents with fancy badges, we were investigators, and we knew exactly how to peel apart a criminal network. My sister dove into the so-called HOA records, pulling every scrap of paper Karen had ever filed with the county. My brother tracked down bank accounts linked to Karen and her board. My father reached out to contacts in the FBI's white-collar crime division. And me? I started interviewing neighbors, documenting every story, every threat, every fake fine that Karen and her board had ever issued. What started as my personal fight quickly turned into a full-blown federal case. The stories we uncovered were staggering. One neighbor, an elderly widow, had been told she owed $25,000 in back dues, and nearly lost her home when she couldn't pay. Another family had their car towed repeatedly because it was parked incorrectly, even though it was in their own driveway. A small business owner on the edge of the lake said Karen's enforcers threatened to shut him down if he didn't donate to the HOA's community fund. Everywhere I turned, I heard the same thing. People living in fear, too scared to speak up, too tired to fight. Karen had built her little empire not on rules, but on intimidation. Federal subpoenas were issued within weeks. Investigators seized her bank accounts, computers, and HOA files. It turned out Karen had been siphoning thousands of dollars every month from fraudulent dues and funneling it into her own accounts. She had bought herself new cars, fancy vacations, even a second house, all on the backs of hard-working families who thought they had no choice but to pay her. Every time I read another detail in the reports, my blood boiled hotter. She hadn't just taken my home. She had stolen people's peace of mind. She had ripped apart communities. Meanwhile, the demolition crew's testimonies sealed the deal. They admitted under oath that Karen had hired them directly, claiming the cabin was abandoned HOA property. She even showed them the same forged documents she had tried to wave in front of the deputies. They thought they were doing legitimate work, but when they realized the truth, most of them agreed to testify against her. Piece by piece, her house of cards collapsed. Court day came faster than expected. Karen walked in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hair frizzy, her face pale. Gone was the smug, self-assured woman who once barked orders at me. Now she looked like what she truly was, a criminal caught red-handed. The federal courtroom was packed with neighbors who had come to see justice done. Some of them smiled at me, nodding in quiet gratitude. Others just sat there, tears in their eyes, finally unburdened by years of harassment. When Karen took the stand, she tried one last time to spin her story. She blamed the board, claimed the documents weren't hers, said she was just following procedure. But the evidence was undeniable. My sister's forensic analysis of the signatures, my brother's tracing of the bank transfers, my father's testimony about the chain of fraud. It all painted a crystal-clear picture. Karen wasn't following procedure. She was the mastermind. And when the judge finally spoke, his words echoed like thunder. You abused your power. You falsified records. You stole from your neighbors. And you destroyed private property under fraudulent claims. You are sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, with restitution to be paid to every victim you extorted. The courtroom erupted. Some gasped, some cheered, some simply let out long breaths of relief. Karen screamed as the marshals led her away, her voice shrill and desperate. You can't do this to me. I run this community. This lake belongs to me. But her words carried no power anymore. She was finished. With Karen gone, the HOA crumbled. Federal agents dismantled the board, seizing every fraudulent file and freezing their accounts. The court appointed a trustee to handle restitution, and within months, families began receiving compensation. The elderly widow got her home secured. The business owner received back every donation he was forced to pay. Neighbors who had been bullied for years finally felt free again. The lake, once under Karen's iron grip, began to breathe. As for me, I wasn't left empty-handed either. The judge ordered full restitution for the destruction of my cabin. Between Karen's seized assets and the HOA's accounts, I received more than enough to rebuild. This time, though, I didn't just rebuild a simple cabin. I built something stronger, bigger, fortified with security systems that linked directly to law enforcement. The new cabin had a wide porch, reinforced windows, and even a small office where I kept all my federal documentation. It was no longer just a retreat, it was a statement. A reminder that no one, no matter how powerful they thought they were, could take it away again. The first night I stayed in the rebuilt cabin, I sat on the porch with my family. My father leaned back in his chair, sipping coffee. My sister scrolled through her phone, smirking at some update from the case files. My brother stared out at the lake, quiet as always, but with the faintest smile tugging at his lips. I looked around at them, feeling a surge of pride. We weren't just a family, we were a force. And together, we had taken down a tyrant. As the stars blinked overhead, I thought about Karen sitting in her prison cell, probably still trying to convince herself she was the victim. But I didn't waste much energy on her anymore. She had chosen her path, and now she was living with the consequences. The real victory wasn't just that she was gone, it was that the community was finally free. From then on, neighbors would stop by my cabin, sometimes just to say thank you, sometimes to share stories of how much better life had become. Kids played on the lake again without fear of being fined for noise violations. Families parked their cars in their own driveways without harassment. People actually smiled when they walked their dogs. It was as if a dark cloud had lifted, and sunlight finally broke through. And me? Every time I sat on that porch, watching the lake shimmer in the afternoon light, I remembered the lesson Karen taught me, not with her words, but with her downfall. Power built on lies always crumbles. Control taken through fear always fails. And when you push the wrong person too far, sometimes you don't just lose your little empire, you lose everything. So now, whenever someone new moves to the lake, I tell them this story. Not to scare them, but to remind them that standing up to bullies is always worth it. Because bullies, no matter how big they act, always fall in the end. And in Karen's case, her fall was louder than the bulldozer that destroyed my first cabin.